Hello, everyone. Dr. Turner here, and I'm coming at you with your very last lecture, Creating an Effective Classroom Environment. Now, if you've been paying attention so far, you'll notice that we've started this semester with planning. We talked about what learning is according to the theorists, how it happens, how to foster it, what it looks like. We talked about designing instruction, and that's going to come to fruition when we see your lessons. And we talked about assessment, how you always start with your goal in mind. What do you want students to know and do before you create a lesson plan? Because otherwise you won't hit your goal. So we talked about how assessment drives the teaching and learning process. Finally, we're going to talk about where all this happens. And this is the classroom environment. All these things that you've learned so far happen in this place. And so it's really imperative that you understand what constitutes a really effective classroom environment. So when we think about teaching, a lot of us, before we go into the trenches, it looks kind of like this. And then sometimes once you enter the real doors, it looks a little like this. The environment can be adventurous, right? And sometimes things like this happen. You'll say, any questions? Students will say, no. Teacher, all right, go ahead and get started. And then like literally 1 minute later, right? All the little chickens are right there. We're done or we don't know what to do. Well, an emphasis on classroom environment asks, why are they all there? Have you failed to do something for those little chickadees? When we think about the classroom environment, we think about it as a big umbrella term because there's a lot going on in that environment. There's the vibe or classroom climate, which is the psychological feel of the room. There's the physical space, there's other people. You make a big difference. You're in that environment. What do you like? What are your dispositions? Expectations, methods, routines, technology, distractions. There's so much happening in this classroom environment. Now, we looked at this reciprocal causation model, and down there in the left, where it says environment, that's where all of this is. All of those things go in that environment down there in the left. And that environment is constantly influencing and being influenced by these other things. By each child has their own personal factors. They have their own sense of self-esteem and identity, their own motives, their own things that they're insecure about. And those things in concert with each other, the environment and the personal factors often create behaviors. And behaviors are driven by reinforcers. They're driven by the complexity of tasks. They're driven by the environment. So all of this works together. Now, early on in the class, we talked about habitats as a metaphor for the classroom environment. And so I want to come back to this idea of the habitat because you imagine yourself as a little god. You don't have all the strengths, you don't have all the powers, but you can control a lot of what happens in that environment. You can think about what you want that to look like so that they are comfortable, they're supported, and learning can occur. So we have this habitat, for instance, and our learners look like, well, they're a little less than motivated right now. We're going to have to get them going. But when we think about managing a classroom environment or managing the habitat, what that means is creating and maintaining an environment conducive to learning and achievement. And managing the habitat means that student behaviors rarely interfere with their own or others' achievement. I want to talk about classroom climate because this is the overall psychological atmosphere of the classroom. And this is huge. It has to do with social emotional learning. It has to do with a sense of community and belonging in the classroom. So if you have a classroom where students feel comfortable working with each other, brainstorming together, where their behaviors don't interfere with that, then you have a positive classroom climate. If students feel safe, if they're enjoying themselves, if they're having a little fun, that's effective. One of the things that determines the behaviors and that classroom environment is whether or not students feel like they're being reinforced for certain things. Now, we talked before about how new teachers especially try to use candy to get everybody to comply or participate in discussion or whatever, and that it's really not your best choice. We talked about how that's an extrinsic motivator. It comes from the outside in the same way that grades, in the same way that stars and all of that try to motivate children from the outside, where intrinsic motivation is much more important, where you make the material relevant and meaningful in a way that students are like, I think I should know that. I kind of want to know now if the founding fathers were as screwed up as our current political system is. Answer, yes. Now, the other kinds of reinforcement I want to talk about are positive and negative because they help you get the behaviors that you want. If you think about reinforcement and punishment, now the green line through the center, the horizontal green through the middle, is reinforcement. Now, you have reinforcement whenever behaviors increase, and you usually have punishment when behaviors decrease. That's the difference between those two terms when we think about it from a behaviorist perspective. When behaviors are reinforced, they go up. When behaviors are punished, they go down. Now, what would it mean then if I present a stimulus, see that plus in the middle? I'm going to apply a stimulus. And what it is, I'm going to apply a positive punishment. You guys are off task, so what I decide to do is start yelling at you. And I'm like, hey, you guys, like, I'm sick of your antics. I'm sick of all the garbage that goes on and how you're treating each other, blah, blah, blah. And I'm giving you the talk, right? If your behavior gets worse, are you being punished or are you being reinforced? And the answer, my friends, is you are being reinforced. If behavior goes up, you just reinforce something. So it might turn out that my little speech to you is the worst thing I can do because the students are finding it reinforcing. They're like, it's hilarious when she gets mad. So I praise a student for effort. That would be positive reinforcement. Now, negative on that far left, that means you're going to remove something. So in the classroom, it might be that I stop criticizing a student and their attention increases. So it's removing something that students don't want. Negative punishment is taking away something that you want. So if you have your cell phone in my class and I'm like, hey, I told you no cell phones, I take away your phone. That's the difference between those terms. I want to talk a little bit about why you might want to use reinforcement rather than punishment. So one of the things that happens inside your habitat, inside your classroom, is behaviors, and they are often in response to other behaviors. Misbehaviors are anything that disrupt learning, put anybody's physical or psychological well-being in jeopardy, or that violate basic moral standards, like if somebody hits somebody else. Now, the conventional wisdom that I got coming out of my teacher preparation program was like, just don't smile, like be super strict because they'll take advantage of you if you're pleasant, if you smile, if you laugh. It comes down to two easy things that you can do in your room. Establish reasonable rules and procedures right from the start and enforce them. And then you can smile all year long. You can build connections with your students. So as you're thinking about the psychological space and the physical space, what rules do you want in place that help students learn, that help them stay on task, that help them respect each other? So here you have two examples of the school rules. These were generated by the ones on the left, children in a grade school, and they've come up with meeting rules, and they've all signed it. So this is their contract to each other. Now you can do that. You can have students generate rules for specific activities, specific contexts, but you might not want to do that the first day. Like, hi, I'm your new teacher. Let's have some rules. What would you like the rules to be? Yeah, dinosaurs all around. Don't do that. When you step into that room, you need to own it. You need to be the leader of that room, and you already need to know what you want. This comic on the right, I included just because this is what happened to me after my first year. I had my general rules, but they just weren't hitting every behavior. So I just started listing all the behaviors. And so I had this ridiculous list by the end of the year. But you need strategies for those misbehaviors because you're going to have them. Even though you've got your rules and you're prepared and you're like, we have rules and consequences, you're going to get behaviors. So what you want to do is start addressing those behaviors in the least intrusive way. And the first one is to ignore it. If you start seeing the behaviors start to self-correct, don't jump in there. If Charlotte sees you looking at her and she puts the phone away, there's no reason to do anything else, right? The behavior is self-correcting. So sometimes you can ignore it. The next thing you do is what's called cueing. And that's, when you like make eye contact with someone or do the little like look into my eyes thing with your fingers. Those are cueing. That's just any kind of nonverbal or verbal, hey, I need your attention, that lets everybody know what you need. The other thing is just pulling the child aside and having a discussion. Please don't do this in front of everybody else. If Charlotte keeps pulling that phone out and you're seeing it, she doesn't think you do because students don't think you can see them. Stop by quickly, say, hey, I need to see you after class for just a minute, please. You don't need to make it loud so everybody knows because that's going to be embarrassing for her. Then she comes and talks to you and you can be like, hey, I feel like your phone's going to be a problem because you can't pay attention. Can you talk to me about why you need to look at it all the time? You're going to build a better respect with your students if you can do that. Another thing you can do is promote self-regulation. Some students don't know how to do that yet. So if they're just like lashing out or they just everything that comes into their head has to be blurted out. Meeting that student by themselves and saying, hey, buddy, is there a thing you can do when you feel like you're going to cry that you can like save your dignity? Can you give me a signal and maybe step out into the hall before it gets to that point? How can you recognize it? So that's what promoting self-regulation means. Punishment, use sparingly, but yeah, if I got to take away Charlotte's phone finally, I'm going to do that, right? I might call parents and I might conduct a planned systematic intervention, and that means looking at all of these things. And I'm going to find out more factors about that particular student. I'm going to look at the environment and see what's interacting with that student. A lot of times what we do when we have misbehaviors on the part of the students is we look at them and we're like, Johnny, knock that off. I'm sick of it, whatever. We look at the student as being the problem. A lot of times, the environment's the problem. They're getting reinforced from a kid 2 aisles over, or there's somebody in the room they have a crush on. It may also be you. You might not be giving enough instructions. They might be confused. When you conduct a systematic look, especially when behaviors have become patterns, that's when you get this out and you look at it with other professionals, with parents, and say, hey, I'm noticing these behaviors occur. They're occurring here. How do we change the reinforcers? If it is reinforcers, what's reinforcing this behavior? What do we do about it? If you do use a punishment, you want to use it effectively and sparingly. So you want to inform students ahead of time what's going to be tolerated and not, and what consequences are going to be. You want to help students understand why they can't do that in your class. I had a student be like, hey, Miss Turner, my bitch. And I said, what? And I pulled him out into the hall and I'm like, hey, what was that about? And he's like, well, I thought you were my friend. I talk to my friends like that. And I said, I am not your friend. And a light bulb came on in my head because I feel like I had up until that time been trying to be really friendly with everybody. I'm like the fun teacher, right? And so in that moment, I realized that I had to tell people why something's not acceptable. A, I'm not your friend. I'm the leader of this class. And it's also not appropriate in this space. Talk to your friends like that somewhere else. If you do have a punishment, like you want to take away a phone or something, do that privately. They are so clued in, especially adolescents, to what each other thinks of them. And that's so much more important than what you think of them, that you want to be discreet as possible, or you're going to create enemies. Problems with punishment include, but are not limited to, a hostile classroom environment. Students turn on you because they're protecting each other. It puts students on the spot, it erodes trust. Students act out to save face, like you didn't hurt me. It decreases attachment to school, and it's possibly the sign of weak leadership. So rather than think of something you do as discipline, it might be helpful for you to think about what you do is lead. Because leadership is so much more powerful than discipline. Leadership is, I know what I'm doing in my class. I know why I'm doing it. I'm excited about it. I know what outcomes I want. I know how to get you there. And I'm going to monitor your progress until you get there. That's leadership. Discipline is, you disrupted my thing and now I'm going to put you in the hall. That's not leadership. Leadership is so much bigger. What I'm going to suggest is on this kind of a chart, if you look at the vertical line going low to high, that's behavioral control, and the blue line going horizontally, that's from low to high responsiveness and then warmth, is that you have a lot of choices to make. So how much control you want and how warm you want to be. And there's no magic formula, but I would say that that upper right quadrant, the authoritative, is the leadership position. That's where you're supportive. That's where you have guidelines. That's where you're assertive. You practice your own self-regulation. You want to get upset, but you don't. You model that. The authoritative space is the most effective space, although some teachers pull off a less warm version of that. It's okay. What you don't want to be is permissive. Well, I just want to be liked, so I'm going to be lenient. I'm not going to ask you to turn in this assignment because you said it was hard for you, and so I don't want to have I'm not going to have guidelines. I'm just going to give you guys A's on this assignment because y'all are just so sweet, and permissive teaching is fearful teaching. So this is my sister. She is the epitome of an authoritative teacher. She's super supportive. She has guidelines. She has goals. She dresses up like characters from Harry Potter because she's nuts. She's very warm, but she also doesn't let students get away with anything. She's not permissive, but she's warm. When I asked her what I could share with you, like the best thing you could do to build an effective classroom environment, she said, notice your students. Notice what they're wearing, what they're doing. Say, I missed you when they're gone. Never humiliate them in front of each other, and work the room. Get out from behind that desk. Walk around. Ask people what they're thinking. And by the way, because she's a little wacky, her students love her. But she's not, her goal isn't to be wacky or to be loved. That is a problematic position. You don't want to go into a classroom and say, I just want to be liked. That was one of the problems I had. And that's why my student was like, hey, what up, my bitch? And I'm like, well, how can you do that? He's like, I feel like you want to be liked. This is how I like people. I'm here to tell you that if you exercise effective leadership, you will be liked because you have activities worthy of their time, you have goals, you have something that at the end of that classroom, they're going to know and be able to do that they couldn't do before. And so that's empowering, and that's what creates a connection between you and your students, not that you're just going to be like a dork and so I'm going to be your chum. And it's lazy. What they need is structure. They need a visionary. They need somebody going, this is what we're going to do, and this is why it's exciting. It's all about knowing who you are, what you're doing, and planning that classroom, planning for instruction. When all else fails, you can always just slowly and dramatically rip a piece of paper. With that said, I bid you farewell, and I will be looking forward to your work this week.